Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the AVPN's webinar, Engaging the Power of Capital to Create Sustainable Livelihoods. We will begin shortly. Thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the AVPN webinar on Engaging the Power of Capital to Create Sustainable Livelihoods. My name is Patsian Loh, Chief of Staff at AVPN, and we're really glad that you're able to join us today. We will be hearing from some key actors in the space of inclusive business, both in Asia and in two very active and successful inclusive businesses like Sabrina from Krakakoa in Indonesia and Joanna from the Jollibee Group Foundation in the Philippines. We are also pleased to have Nancy and Toyin, our counterparts from African Venture Philanthropy Alliance, who will share about the state of affairs in Africa and the unique opportunity that inclusive business presents. AVPN is a unique funders network committed to building a high-impact philanthropy and social investment community across Asia. Currently, we have over 550 members across 33 markets, and we are very pleased to have one member and an inclusive business from our DueShare platform speaking today, together with our partners in the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance. African Venture Philanthropy Alliance is a new capital network in Africa whose mission is to improve lives in Africa by increasing the flow of financial, human, and intellectual capital to social investment. They do this by connecting, equipping, and empowering investors seeking social impact. This is made possible with the access to new people, capital, tools, and knowledge that will enhance their ability to achieve greater impact. Our inclusive business journey began in this year, 2019, where AVPN, in collaboration with IBAN, the Inclusive Business Action Network, which is supported by GIZ, the German Development Agency, to run a series of awareness-raising and capacity-building events around inclusive business in Southeast Asia. We focused on 4 markets: Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Vietnam. During this time, we made an effort to work with IBAN to define what inclusive businesses are. Inclusive businesses are activities and models that provide goods, services, and livelihoods on a commercially viable basis, either at scale or scalable, to people living at the base of the pyramid, making them part of the value chain of companies as suppliers, distributors, retailers, or customers. The term base of the pyramid refers to the poor and low-income socio-economic group of society. In global terms, it currently comprises about 4 billion people living on less than $6 to $8 per day, depending on the region. Through the activities that AVPN conducted, we found that there is growing awareness and interest in inclusive business in Asia. There are 4 main trends that we have identified in the course of our work. In this region, the BOP offers $220 billion US worth of market opportunity, with the potential to unlock 1.6 million job opportunities, supporting over 70 million at the base of the pyramid by 2025. Inclusive businesses contribute to women's development and empowerment by addressing underlying causes of gender inequality. Across the board, inclusive businesses have also shown innovation in developing technology and business models that effectively integrate the bottom of the pyramid, providing them with sustainable livelihood opportunities. And last but not least, the government's support for inclusive business is gaining momentum. For example, the Philippines was the first in this region to introduce inclusive business accreditation policy in 2017, led by the Board of Investment. There is potential for similar kinds of policy activities in other markets in the region, like Indonesia and Cambodia. In this context, we also see that policy plays a very big role to sustain and amplify impact from inclusive business. Constructive policy participation and support can unlock potential for impact in each part of the commercial value chain. In the business sector, policy can catalyze the growth of inclusive business models in respective markets. Policy can also unlock and improve access to marginalized communities so that they can receive important products and services and be a viable force of consumption. Policy can also advance opportunities for economy and investment to engage with inclusive businesses in different parts of the value chain. And last but not least, policy can also encourage responsible and sustainable employment and job creation, truly reflecting inclusive practices in the business sector. Policy does need to consider how it intends to take ownership of inclusive business in its policy agenda, the scope of the role that policy should play, at what level will policy intervene in the national, state, or municipal development of inclusive business, and also the role it intends to play when interacting with other parts of the inclusive business ecosystem. Over the last year, as we have worked in the 4 markets of Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Vietnam, these findings have allowed us to constructively engage with stakeholders from different sectors. Despite sharing similar social economic issues, inclusive business is at varying stages of development and at varying levels of awareness in these markets. This diversity is important as it presents a great opportunity to understand the range of challenges faced by inclusive businesses and impact investors in growing this space in Asia. Our early engagement with awareness seminars introduced the concept to a wide audience in each market, was quickly followed by master classes for a more targeted group made up of inclusive businesses and impact investors to measure and develop investment readiness, culminating in a matchmaking session as part of our Deal Share live sessions at the AVPN conference in June 2019. During this session, 8 inclusive businesses of different sizes, all involved in agriculture, presented their business models to explore partnerships with potential funders and resource providers. In the beginning of September, we also conducted 2 policy-related workshops in Indonesia and the Philippines to explore the role of policy in furthering the goals of inclusive business. Earlier in the year, AVPN also participated with the support of our sister network, African Venture Philanthropy Alliance, with a roadshow to share more about our learnings across the Asian markets to our friends in Africa. Before I introduce the speakers, some housekeeping rules for everyone. With the exception of the person speaking on the webinar at the time, everyone else will be muted on this webinar. We will take your questions after the presentations are finished. Please feel free to use the console to type in your questions during the webinar, and I will raise the questions to our speakers after their presentations. If you have other questions that are not answered by the end of the webinar, please email us at inclusivebusiness@avpn.asia. On that note, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for today. Representing Krakakoa, we have Sabrina Mustopo. Krakakoa supplies organically grown cacao sourced from small farms in Indonesia that practice sustainable farming methods. Sabrina's passion for her home country, Indonesia, and agricultural development have led her to establish Krakakoa. She believes in the power of the private sector to create sustainable and meaningful change, and the need for Indonesia to invest in downstream industries. Over to you, Sabrina. You should now have control of the presentation.
Thank you, Patsy, and thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Sabrina, and I am very happy to take you through and introduce you a little bit about the Indonesian cocoa sector and the work that we're doing at Krakakoa and the impact that we are hoping to achieve. To set the stage, this is a little bit of information about the Indonesian cocoa sector. So Indonesia is a fairly important player in the global cocoa sector. When we first started out 6 years ago, Indonesia is the third largest cocoa producer in the world. Unfortunately, today we've fallen down to number 6, but we're still a big player in the international market. Much lower or much smaller than our West African counterparts, but in Asia, we're still the largest producer of cocoa beans. And very important to note as well, the Indonesian cocoa sector is largely dominated by smallholder farmers. So about 90% of the cocoa grown in the country is grown by about 1.5 million, 1.5 million cocoa farmers in the country. So in terms of the social impact that the sector has, is pretty significant for Indonesia. However, when we look closely into the sector, we see that there's a series of issues that we would like to address. Firstly, there's issues of low productivity. There's a lot of disease nowadays that have emerged due to climate change and due to monoculture spreading or increasing the spread of diseases. Farmers who have been planting for a long time, 20 years or so, nowadays face disease that they didn't used to. So there's also a lack of farmer knowledge on what good agriculture management techniques is. And the result of that is that there's low farmer income. So most cocoa farmers in Indonesia today earn less than $2 a day. There's also an issue with quality. Most of the Indonesian cocoa beans produced in the country today is not fermented. So about 90% of the beans is unfermented. So when you have unfermented beans, that actually results in very poor quality cocoa and very poor quality chocolate. And that's augmented also by the fact that lots of the times on the farm level, farmers are not segregating disease and healthy beans. So the results of that is that there's low quality local cocoa and chocolate. Lastly, even though Indonesia produces a lot of cocoa beans, we actually don't produce a lot of chocolate. We export most of the products in raw or semi-processed forms in the form of cocoa butter, liquor, or powder. And a lot of the chocolate that's even sold in Indonesia today is actually imported chocolate. It's either imported from other Asian countries or European countries, and we actually produce very little chocolate domestically. So that results in a loss of economic value creation and also a loss of employment. With the problems in mind, Krakakoa was set up, and we have four main mission that we are trying to achieve. First and foremost is to improve the livelihood of Indonesian cocoa farmers, and secondly is to increase the sustainability of the land use sector when it comes to cocoa, so increasing the sustainability of how cocoa farming is done today. Thirdly, we also hope to increase the profile of Indonesian cocoa and chocolate, and lastly, we hope to contribute to the economic development of Indonesia. When we look at the cocoa value chain and how cocoa is different from the conventional cocoa value chain, this diagram represents it. In the conventional cocoa value chain, there's a lot of different intermediaries between the farmer and the final consumer. So between the farmer and the consumer, there may be 4 to 7 different intermediaries, starting from a village trader who purchases the beans directly from farmers. This gets sold sometimes multiple times until it reaches a consolidator that sells it to a trader and exporter. Finally, the cocoa beans would reach a cocoa mill that turns it into cocoa powder, butter, or liquor. And then it reaches the hands of confectionery companies, and those are the brands that we know and love, that convert all these intermediary products into the final consumer product before it finally gets sold to retailers. So with Krakakoa, between the farmer and the consumer, there's essentially us and the retailers. The way that we achieve impact is through 3 main different sets of activities. Firstly is through the training. Because of the direct sourcing model that we have, we're able to engage directly with the farmers and provide them with the training that they need. Before we even start the training program, we conduct surveys to understand what the needs are for different sites, and we tailor-made and customize the training specific to the groups of farmers that we engage with. So training is all provided for free alongside the equipment for the smallholder farmers, and the curriculum includes integrated pest management, organic farm management techniques, conservation, and post-harvest management as well. And the result of that is that we're able to increase farmer income, increase the sustainability of the farming sector, and also the quality of the beans that we source. Secondly, through the sourcing that we do with the farmers, we're able to purchase beans at up to 3 times the market price. So we source beans from 2 groups of farmers, those that we provided training ourselves, and we also work with other organizations such as GIZ in Kalimantan, where they provided the training, and then we did the offtake from that particular group of farmers that they've been trained. With the price premiums that we pay to the farmers, we're able to increase the farming income, and with the price stability, so we always pay a flat price for the beans regardless of what market price is doing. That provides added income security for the farmers as well. Lastly, with the manufacturing that we do, which is the processing of the cocoa beans into the final product in our own factory in Sumatra, we're able to increase the economic value creation. And also because our factory employs mainly women, we also increase employment for women in the sector. We're very proud to be the only Indonesian chocolate maker to win awards at the Academy of Chocolate and also at the Red Dot Design. When we first started out, one of the hypotheses that we have was that if we included farmers in a fair way in our value chain and we paid them more for high quality beans, that there's no reason why we couldn't produce something that's world class, even though Indonesian cocoa is thought to be something of inferior quality. So the awards is validation that that fact is true, that if we are able to create value for the farmers, that they can also create something of value for us as well. We're very thankful that in our journey, we've been around for about 6 years. We've worked with a number of organizations. We've had a number of investors that we've worked with, who've supported us throughout our entire journey. We have different NGOs that we work with as well, such as Swiss Contact, who have supported us in our training program, WWF as well, in terms of some of the conservation work that we do, and some other donors and development organizations along the way.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. That was very informative. Next, we will hear from Joanna Lau from Jollibee Foundation, who is the social responsibility arm of Jollibee Foods Corporation, Philippines' largest food service company and Asia's largest restaurant company. Joanna leads Jolly Group Foundation's Farmer Entrepreneurship Program, which aims to help smallholder farmers improve their income by linking them to institutional buyers like Jollibee Foods Corporation. Without further ado, I will now hand over the presentation to Joanna, who will speak for approximately 10 minutes. Joanna, you should now have control over the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Patsian. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about creating an ecosystem of support for farmer entrepreneurs. Let me begin with the story of Ligaya Miras from Cebu City in the Visayas region of the Philippines. Ligaya is a farmer, like her parents and grandparents before her. While her husband and sons do the heavy work of tilling the soil, Ligaya is in charge of selling their produce. Where does she sell it? In the past, this was a problem. Her village is 30 kilometers away from the biggest public market. To bring the harvest there, she had to pay for transportation, hauling, packaging materials, selling space, and her meals and ride home. When she got to the market, the price was not even guaranteed. For example, sometimes the price of lettuce could drop to as low as 10 US cents per kilo. Imagine growing that lettuce for months and it sold for just 10 cents. Often, Ligaya barely recovered her costs. Sometimes, she just chose to sell the harvest to the trader who came by their farm. He would take the produce and give her the payment later, and she had no way of verifying what price he got. Unfortunately, Ligaya's story is familiar to many farmers, and you could even see it in Sabrina's presentation earlier. On the surface, the problem seemed obvious. The farmers had no direct access to markets. 10 years ago, our leadership at Jollibee Group Foundation directed us to find a way to help. Jollibee Group Foundation is the social responsibility arm of Jollibee Foods Corporation, the largest food service company in Asia. It makes sense for the company to help farmers by buying from them directly. So, we asked the purchasing department of our parent company if they were willing to do it. They answered us, "We want to do that. We want to buy directly from farmers. But we tried it before and it didn't work. The farmers delivered once or twice and then they stopped." So the market was willing to buy, but it couldn't be sustained. Perhaps this resonates with your own experience. And as we delve deeper, we began to realize the problem cannot easily be solved because the farmers and the issues they face are part of a larger ecosystem. Cambridge Dictionary defines ecosystem as all the living things in an area and the way they affect each other and the environment. Since they are interconnected, changing one part may entail changing other parts as well. Let me illustrate through another story about a group of blind men. They heard that a new animal came to town, so they went to visit. One blind man touched the tail and said, "Oh, it's like a rope." Another blind man touched the leg and said, "It's like the trunk of a tree." Another reached the ear and said, "It's like some kind of fan." They could not agree. Can you guess what the animal was? This is how the blind men described an elephant, but only the parts that they could reach. That's what it's like if you only see or experience one part. You may not realize the bigger picture is entirely different unless you speak to the other members of the ecosystem. So when we began studying the system the farmers belonged to, we were like blind men ourselves. We knew that we could not go into this alone. We could only see parts of the system. When Ligaya joined the Farmer Entrepreneurship Program, or FEEP, she and her fellow farmers realized that the only way they could meet the high volume requirements of institutional buyers was by organizing themselves to consolidate their produce and do collective marketing. And in the same way, we also had to form collective support for them. This includes working with multiple actors in the ecosystem, such as government, private institutions, NGOs, and the academe. Another part of the system were financing institutions. For years, they saw lending to farmers as a high risk because the farmers were rarely able to pay back their loans. So we invited them to join our support system, and they became interested because a link to market was involved. Our FEP implementing partner in Cebu is Lamak Multipurpose Cooperative. With the training we provided, Lamak guided farmers like Ligaya through the different parts of the system. The Lamak farmers now supply over 60 markets in Cebu, including restaurants from our own company, other hotels, and supermarkets. To help ensure that Ligaya meets the food safety standards of these markets, the local government trained her in good agricultural practices, and she is now a GAP certified farmer. And through one of our youth programs, students from the University of San Carlos also helped Ligaya build a rain shelter with LED lights to help her lettuce grow faster. To date, 16 farmer groups all over the country supply assorted vegetables directly to Jollibee Foods Corporation. Since 2009, they have delivered over 7,000 metric tons of vegetables to the company, worth close to $4.9 million. So that's equivalent to around 20% of the company's annual vegetable requirements. As the support system grows, we welcome more actors taking part. As we reflect on the past 10 years of FEP, I would like to share 3 key takeaways that we have learned from working with ecosystems. First is to study the issues underlying the problem. On the surface, what may seem to be the problem might actually be the effect. What was causing it? For example, if markets weren't buying directly from farmers, what underlying structures led to this situation? This leads to the second point, which is knowing the actors in the system. Do a thorough environment scan. Learn who's who and how they affect and interact with one another. We also take time to get to know each actor before deciding to partner with them. Do our goals align? Are we clear about our expectations from each other? Admittedly, it can be challenging to work with others. So we come to our third takeaway, which is to clarify our purpose and commit to it. What is our purpose in collaborating? We need to remember the purpose despite the difficulty. collaboration demands a personal commitment that goes even beyond the organization at times. The journey has not been easy, but it has definitely been worthwhile. Today, Ligaya earns much more from farming. She can send her children to college, and they have begun renovating their home. Ligaya says, "We became confident. As a member of FEP, I don't see myself as just a farmer producer. I am an agripreneur." As we look to the future, our dream is to work with more partners in the ecosystem to help more farmers like Ligaya become entrepreneurs. Here you can see the mascot of our company, the beloved Jollibee, with our farmers. To know more, please like our Facebook page, or you can contact us through this email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. That is a very informative view of how a large company in the Philippines has been adopting and rolling out inclusive business practices. Now let's shift our lens across the oceans to Africa, where we have recently uncovered that there were some common experiences and lessons as we have had in Asia. I would like to invite Nancy, Executive Director, West Africa of the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance, to share a little about the inclusive business environment in Kenya. Nancy, we will shortly give you control of the presentation. Please note that this segment will be approximately 5 minutes. Over to you now, Nancy.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I'm actually the Executive Director for the East Africa region. Our headquarters are in Kenya, so that's where I'm dialing in from. And I'm very pleased to be with you today. I want to give you a very high level, for those who don't know much about East Africa, or in particular Kenya. Kenya is a lower middle income country with a population of 46 million, most of whom are under the age of 25. And despite the country's accession to lower middle income status in September 2014, 46% of our population still lives below the national poverty line, which is less than $1.90 per day. Kenya's performance is meeting its national Millennium Development Goal targets. Was mixed. While there was significant improvements in education enrollment, gender equality, and women's empowerment, there was more moderate success in eradicating extreme poverty. And I think we all agree here that inclusive business can play a key role in accelerating achievements of the SDGs by providing livelihoods and access to essential goods and services such as healthcare, water, sanitation, energy, etc. So I want to show you, what I want to share today is some slides from a report that was done by Business Call to Action. And it was done in 2017. The report is called New Horizons, Accelerating Sustainable Development Through Inclusive Business in Kenya in particular. I'm trying to move to the next slide. My slide is not moving. Can you hear me? There, okay. This, as I mentioned, this table is from a source. The source is New Horizons, Accelerating Sustainable Development, and it was done by Inclusive Business, Business Call to Action, the report highlighted the results of more than 60 different inclusive businesses in Kenya. Most of them were SMEs, so not very large organizations. But this first slide shows you the commercial drivers for inclusive business. As you'll see at the top, the main driver is to get a competitive advantage or edge in the marketplace, followed by increased profitability and productivity. When I look at this, I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of really people understanding how inclusive business can help people come out of poverty and change the landscape a little bit. Next slide, please. This slide shows you how companies are engaging with those living at the bottom of the economic pyramid, primarily as customers. If you look at this slide, in my view, the last three, distributors, retailers, and shareholders, should be a lot larger, especially distributors and retailers. We do have some companies, for example, Pat-Sian had talked about, we had recently had a policy roadshow, inclusive business policy roadshow in Kenya, and Nigeria, and Ghana. And one of the speakers who spoke in Kenya, a gentleman who owns a company called Bidco, one of our largest manufacturers of edible products in the country, actually in East Africa. His company has successfully been able to include more of those living at the bottom of the pyramid as retailers and distributors and outgrowers. So they're seeing a real change in the numbers as opposed to what we're seeing in this particular table. Of course, customers will grow, but then products have to be directly suited for that customer base. Next slide, please. This slide shows how inclusive business contributes to the SDGs, especially amongst those, the respondents in Kenya. And you'll see that 64% of the respondents actually measured, only 47% reported this contribution publicly. So there's still some work to do, one around how things are being measured, but also reporting so that the country as a whole can really see the benefits of inclusive business. Next slide. This slide shows us the obstacles to scaling up inclusive business. Again, please remember, this is information from our Kenya respondents. Access to finance is one of the major issues that most companies reported. For engaging in inclusive business, over 1/3 of the companies also reported that the ability to expand into new business lines, enhance brand identity, or access new consumer markets were driving their engagement. 1/4 considered inclusive business means to enhance the security and sustainability of their supply chain. Respondents from SMEs tended to highlight the importance of competitive advantage and differentiate from competitors, while respondents representing larger companies saw increased profits and access to new markets as the key commercial drivers of engagement. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, sorry, one back. Yeah, this, again, strategies used to scale inclusive business. Establishing partnerships seems to be the biggest, the most important strategy and effective strategy. But respondents did say that sometimes their concern in establishing partnerships has to do with how do you verify the partners? How do you verify and validate partners? awareness raising, training for BOP customers, deploying new technologies. All of those are some of the strategies being used in Kenya to increase, to scale inclusive business. I'd like now to move to invite Toyin Adegbite Moore, who is my counterpart in West Africa, Executive Director for AVPA West Africa region. Thank you, Toyin.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for giving us a very good lens into what is happening in the Kenyan landscape. Apologies for switching east and west. I hope now that I've got it correct. And we're very happy to welcome Toyin Adegbite Moore, Executive Director for the West Africa region, to share a particular case study of a successful inclusive business practice in Nigeria. Toyin, you have approximately 2 minutes, and we will now give you control of the slide.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity and thanks for joining us on, today. So as Nancy had said, inclusive business is really something that we all are trying to really push from, all across Africa in terms of really looking at how to bring people from the bottom of the pyramid and lift them up into economic viability and sustainability. In Nigeria, one of the things that's really glaring is the fact that there are about 120 million people who are living at the bottom of the pyramid and earning less than $1 per day. So this really is a huge inequality that we need to address. And mind you, Nigeria has the latest figures right now is about 200 million people living in Nigeria. So you can imagine compared to Kenya, when Nancy was talking about 46 million people in Kenya versus 200 million in Nigeria. So having 120 million living below poverty line is really it's a monumental issue. And most of this 120 million happen to be young people who are uneducated and not, and also unemployed. So with that, this example is about it falls within the agribusiness sector. And the speaker that spoke at our event, who representing Convention on Business Integrity, CBI, and Business Innovation Facility, BIF, talked about an example, and really in all of Nigeria, they're the only inclusive business model that we could find. And it's really interesting in the sense that they're working with, they use agribusiness, which includes cassava, catfish, milk to empower Nigerians. And again, looking at about right now, they've been doing this for about 4 years. They've gotten 455,000 people empowered, and their income has increased, over the course of those 4 years. And the farmers are engaged not just as customers, but as shareholders. So they are, gaining profit, which is really what Nancy was referring to earlier, that we need to kind of flip. If you remember the chart that she showed, we need to kind of flip that chart and see what we can do as we move forward with the inclusive business model. Next slide. Next slide, please. So again, looking at the project has helped Nigeria to close its protein gap by ensuring products such as milk are increasingly available within the rural areas. And one of the key pieces out of the work that CBI and BIF did is really looking at how they advocated for a whole value chain, which they felt must include the 7 I's. And it's really a great opportunity to really look at how are we making sure that these businesses are in fact having inclusive business practices involved, and they came up with the 7 I's: innovation to overcome market constraints, income growth for small holder farmers, inclusion of women and youth in emerging economy, in emerging economic growth, and integration of rural and informal communities, economies into the mainstream, investment, attraction by the power of example and potential, infrastructure, very important, established by the government to support the scaling up of successful businesses, and then improvements, for sustained, for the participants to continue to be aligned in the activities that are being done within that sector. So those are the examples that was the example that was shared, and how really smallholder farmers are not just being customers or receivers, but really are shareholders in this opportunity, and their lives have improved, and the the agribusiness value chain has also improved. So whole value, whole chain, whole value.
Toyin, this is Patsian. We have questions fast and heavily coming in, so if I could ask you to take just 1 minute to wrap up the last slide you have.
Fantastic. 1 minute. Next slide, please. So what's the call to action? Nancy already mentioned a lot of this, but I'll just kind of go through to the last part of our conversation, and that is the importance of access to affordable finance is very important, because that's seen as the obstacle for scaling inclusive business. The opportunities are very much, they abound across the continent. So we need to engage government and private sector and really kind of push for government to play its role in creating an enabling environment so that private sector can really have the incentives that they need to support people at the bottom of the pyramid. And just, again, as a follow-up to the roadshow that happened in Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana, a group of policymakers from Nigeria will be going to Bangkok to again meet with policymakers in the Asian region, the South region, to really talk about again how to learn more about inclusive business practices and customize and bring it back to Nigeria and then customize it across the continent. So, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Toyin. And how wonderful to know that there will be more of our friends in Africa coming to join us in the upcoming Inclusive Business Summit. I'd like to now go into the Q&A section of the webinar. We have many questions flooding in, and I will first of all extend our apologies to anyone whose questions we may not be able to get to today. Let me first start by reading out the first question, which is directed at Joanna. What sort of partnerships has Jollibee Foundation engaged with in growing its farmer entrepreneurship program and its range of IB activities? Joanna, please go ahead.
Hello. Hi. Thanks, Patsian. So as you could see from the presentation, what's important for us is to first understand the actors in the ecosystem where the farmers work in. And by understanding that, then we can have a better view of what roles are needed, and therefore what kind of partners should be looked for. Like, for example, one element there is there should be a financing element. There should be a partner that is able to finance the farmers. And then there's also the role of organizing the farmers, somebody who's on the ground, helping them and guiding them in their day-to-day. And there's even role for the academe, for universities, for research and training and such things. So what's important, one thing I've found important is for it to be multi-sectoral. finding partners from different sectors. And secondly, like I said, that we get to know each organization a little bit before we jump in, rather than just jumping into a partnership. Like when we say, oh, we want to help farmers, what exactly do you mean by that? Because you might not have the same kind of understanding. So those two things, multi-sectoral and an alignment of objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Multi-sector partnerships and alignment of objectives, and taking the time to study before jumping in. Particularly looking at financing partners and ground level organizing partners. The second question here is directed at Sabrina with respect to the cacao industry. There is a question here about how has your enterprise been funded, and related to that, by giving cacao farmers a price of up to 3 times what the market practice is, how do you get an edge when you market your final product, which you had bought at a high cost? So I think these are related questions. Maybe Sabrina, you could answer them.
Sure. So in terms of funding, we have different types of investors that we've worked with in the past. Initially, for the first 2 years, it was a bootstrapped company before we got external investments. Started with angel investors and then moving on to more institutional investors. So very thankful to the host of different partners that we've worked with, because they've helped us with everything from investment readiness to doing impact assessment to not just providing the financing itself. So organizations like IIX has helped us tremendously, and many of the others that we've worked with as well. In terms of how do we, I guess the question is, how do we then afford, or how does the business model work if we pay so much more for the beans? We believe that even though we are a social enterprise or impact business, we still have to compete on quality just like anybody else, alongside with any other chocolate company that does not have impact at its focus. So because of that, we produce something, we're very focused on quality, from the packaging to the quality of the product itself. We want to deliver something that is of high value to the customers. So we do play in the premium segment, and we do charge a premium price for the product, but it's not just because we are helping farmers, but also because we believe that we're delivering something of quality and of value to the customers. And in terms of marketing, that's really something that we try to emphasize a lot to the customers that we serve.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. I think the overarching point about how impact investment has played a role in growing your organization, as well as using that as a key selling point of the quality of your product, is something that I take away from that answer. We have a question that is now directed at both Sabrina and Joanna. And the question is, what role did policy play in the success of Jollibee's initiatives as well as Krakakoa's growth? I'm going to direct the question first to Joanna to answer, and then we'll come to Sabrina for your perspective. Joanna, please go ahead.
Okay. So when we talk about policy, there are formal policies and maybe informal policies, or rather internal policies. I think at the start of the program, something that was very helpful is in terms of the internal policies of the company. Because if you look at the farmer groups as suppliers compared to other regular suppliers who are companies and professionals, then the farmers may face a certain disadvantage, and that's why we have the program. It's important to Jollibee Foods Corporation that the farmers meet the quality of the produce, but in other ways, some of their other internal policies, they were able to adjust in order for the farmers to adapt and be able to deliver, such as, for example, taking the time to do one-on-one interviews, taking the time to orient the farmers about the company requirements, things like that. So that's an example, I would say, of an internal policy. In terms of more wider reaching policies, I think we're just seeing that come into play now. And I think what will really help is helping the farmers helping to build an enabling environment for the farmers, such as what policies will enable the farmers to access financing, better farm-to-market roads, things like that, then those are the kinds of policies that would be helpful. Thank you.
Sabrina, your perspective from Krakakoa?
In terms of policies, I think the policies that we have benefited the most from are not specific to impact businesses, but more through small and medium enterprises. So supporting policies that the government has given out for everything from training to different classes of businesses that SMEs are able to operate in, and different types of marketing support as well that the government has given. So those are some of the benefits that we have received. At a more macro level, I think we've also benefited from some of the policies that the government has had when it comes to working with donors. Because I think the space that we operate in, and nowadays everybody talks about blended finance, and really what is the role of donors and how can we all work together from the private sector side, from donors, from the government, in order to have or to achieve similar goals. The way that the Indonesian government has worked with international donors has also, we have benefited from that. So for example, some of the training programs that we have implemented has been supported by the US government, and that's also a policy decision that both the US and the Indonesian government has come together and decided, okay, we want to support specific sectors within the Indonesian economy, so we've benefited from that.
Great, thank you so much, Sabrina. And I think it's a good segue to the next question, particularly since you're talking about funding that has emerged from partnerships between government and private sector and the development sector. This question is about access to finance, which Nancy, you had mentioned in your presentation about Kenya. The question here is, how can we identify sources for more affordable access to finance, and in what way can impact investment play a role? I'd like to direct this question first to Nancy for a perspective from Kenya, and then maybe I can ask Sabrina to comment a little bit more about how you think impact investors can do more to provide affordable forms of finance for inclusive businesses like yours. Nancy, can we start with you first?
Thank you very much. Well, I think the mandate of AVPA and AVPN is basically to bring capital providers from across the entire continuum together. So the role AVPA will play is in helping identify affordable financing for inclusive business, would be to bring those kind of players together. Everything from grants to impact funds, venture capital funds, and philanthropic funds, all of that together. The other thing is really about educating the mainstream avenues for finance. I think a lot of the banks in this country and other mainstream institutions that are providing capital just don't understand what inclusive business is trying to achieve. So one of the roles we see ourselves playing is as an advocate and an educator, and bringing all those kind of players together to help them really understand the inclusive business model and how it can benefit not only communities, but the country and the continent as a whole.
These forms of capital. Thank you, Nancy. I think that's a very good insight into how networks can help to bridge different forms of capital to support growth of inclusive business. Sabrina, your perspective as an inclusive business yourself?
I think firstly, just with any investor-investee relationship is firstly having the alignment of where the business is and what the investor brings to the table is important. Because even though it's impact investing, I think there's a whole spectrum of investors out there, from those that are more impact focused and others that are more focused on returns. So having that clarity and understanding of, okay, where are we and where do we want to get to and what are the goals that we together want to achieve, that alignment is important. And I think specifically for how impact investors can help inclusive businesses, for me, one of the really powerful areas is when we think about why there isn't more inclusive business. Even though in the long run, I do believe that doing good does actually work out for the benefit of the companies, there are certain trade-offs that you make in the short run, right? So for example, for us, paying more for the farmers, paying for the training, and that hits our bottom line. And especially business that are just starting out, that's where it's the most risky. So where I've seen a lot of benefit when it comes to impact investors supporting social businesses is really in early stage companies when there's some sort of a de-risking mechanism. So when financing or money has come in from maybe historically philanthropic sources that do not expect a return on investment, or from donors, and then combining that with a little bit more of an investment vehicle. So the expectation on return is less, and the support that's provided to businesses, in terms of non-financial support, but then some of the other things that can help a business to grow, especially for early stage companies, I think that can be really useful, and we've benefited from that as well during the early years when we first started out. And then towards later on, I think it's about thinking about where are we competitive in the open market. So in terms of not just making the business more viable and more attractive for impact investments or for impact investors, but then making it attractive to all investors as a whole is also another place where investors, especially at this stage of the company where we're at right now, a lot of our investors have given us guidance on. So it's really, I think, the role that investors play really changes over time, and the benefits that they bring also change over time.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. We have a timing indicator that tells us we now have time for just one final question that I would need to seek a very brief answer to, from which I'm directing this question to Joanna. My question here is, what is your advice for other large companies that are looking to provide more opportunities and support, both financial and non-financial, to bring inclusive businesses into their value chain? Joanna, if I could have a brief answer from you.
Okay, so quickly then, I would offer two main pieces of advice. The first one is to look at your core business and figure out if there's a way that your core business can address a social issue. Because in that way, if the social issue is too far from what you actually do, then you might not sustain it. And if it's linked to your core business, then that means that you can use the expertise from your company to address the issue. So in our case, a food company buys raw materials from the farmers. The second piece of advice is, if you're coming at it completely from a company point of view, then is to find a development partner. Because in things like inclusive business, social impact, there's a lot of social preparation to be done, a lot of capacity building for low-income communities, and oftentimes people from the company don't have the time to do that extra training. So it would be advantageous to find a development partner like a foundation or other organizations that you can work with to do that part. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. You were very brief indeed, but very valuable. So this is all the time we have, I'm afraid, today for the webinar. Thank you very much to Sabrina, Joanna, Nancy, and Toyin for sharing your respective inclusive business experiences with us. We will be posting this webinar on our website as a recording by next week. Please look out for it. Before we end, please be informed that there are other ways you can continue to engage with inclusive business. You can visit AVPN's DealShare platform, which is available at avpn.asia/DealShare platform, where you can find inclusive business examples. You can also visit the upcoming ASEAN Inclusive Business Summit on the 1st of November in Bangkok. You can also email us at inclusivebusiness@avpn.asia, or get in touch with our colleagues in Africa at info@avpa.africa. info@avpa.africa. Thank you everyone for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar or event. Have a good day.